Once upon a time, Europe was the beating heart of Christianity, the land that crowned kings beneath the cross, sent missionaries across oceans, and carved cathedrals that touched the sky. Today, those cathedrals echo with emptiness. Their stained glass glows not with candlelight, but the flicker of tourists' phones. Back in 1900, nearly 95% of Europeans identified as Christian. By 2020, that figure had slipped to around 70%. And in most Western nations, fewer than 1 in 10 attend church weekly, dropping below 5% in countries like France and the UK. In Sweden, less than 20% of teenagers go through confirmation today, down from 80% in the 1970s. In Italy, about 80% still call themselves Catholic, yet nearly a third never attend Mass. What happened to the continent that built its identity on faith? How did the birthplace of the Reformation, the Renaissance, and the Vatican become the world's most secular region? This isn't just a story of disbelief. It's a story of replacement. How the divine gave way to reason, how cathedrals turned into concert halls, and how spirituality was quietly rewritten by science, comfort, and choice. From Martin Luther's defiance to the digital age's distractions, from holy wars to human rights. This is the long unraveling of faith in the very place it once ruled the world. You're watching Geologic, where history, science, and belief collide. Subscribe if you haven't already, and join us as we uncover how Europe, once the cradle of Christianity, became the capital of secularism. To understand how Europe lost its faith, we must return to the moment it first began questioning it: the Protestant Reformation. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in 1517, he wasn't trying to destroy Christianity. He was trying to renew it. But by defying Rome's authority and translating the Bible into everyday language, he introduced something revolutionary: the idea that truth could be reached without the church's permission. Luther and John Calvin taught that salvation came through personal faith, not priestly mediation. Their theology stripped the clergy of its monopoly on grace and gave every believer direct access to God. And with that came Luther's radical doctrine of vocation, the belief that all legitimate work could be an act of worship. This simple idea dignified secular labor and blurred the boundary between sacred and ordinary life. Over time, it normalized secular identity itself, reducing dependence on monasteries, clergy, and church institutions. But unity cracked. Competing interpretations of Scripture soon erupted into Europe's bloodiest conflict, the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, leaving over 8 million dead and entire regions devastated. What began as a fight for faith ended as a struggle for power. The illusion that religion guaranteed peace was shattered. From those ruins rose skepticism. A century later, the French Revolution turned that skepticism into doctrine. Churches were seized, priests exiled, and the cult of reason replaced the Mass. Europe had not only separated church from state, it had begun to separate faith from identity itself. The Reformation was meant to renew belief, but it also unleashed the modern mind, one that questioned everything, even heaven. Before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Luther's rebellion strengthened Christianity, or started its slow decline? Let me know in the comments below. The Enlightenment did what no war could. It replaced revelation with reason. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant declared that truth came not from heaven, but from human observation. Knowledge was democratized. The cosmos mapped by mathematics instead of miracles. Isaac Newton's laws of motion, John Locke's theories of rights, and a tidal rise in literacy from 10% of Europeans in 1700 to nearly 80% by 1900, broke the church's monopoly on truth. Then came the Industrial Revolution, beginning in Britain around 1750 and sweeping through the continent by the 1800s. Millions left rural parishes for crowded cities, where they encountered diverse beliefs and ideologies no longer bound by religious norms. The village church that once anchored community was replaced by factories, schools, and civic halls. By the 19th century, public education had become secular, teaching science, literature and moral philosophy without reference to scripture. The 19th century also birthed new intellectual challengers. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, 1859, redefined creation. Karl Marx called religion the opium of the masses. Sigmund Freud dismissed faith as a wish fulfillment. Together, they removed God from the laboratory, the classroom, and even the psyche. By 1900, universities had replaced cathedrals as centers of truth. The sacred yielded to the secular, revelation to reason. Europe's questions had changed. No longer, what does God want? But, what can humanity build? When the 20th century began, Europe still looked Christian on the surface. Church bells, clerical robes, kings sworn before altars. But faith's authority was already hollow. Then came the World Wars, and the facade crumbled. The First World War turned Christian nations against one another in mechanized slaughter. Priests blessed troops on both sides. The Second brought Auschwitz and Hiroshima, horrors that no sermon could explain. How could the Christian continent commit such evil? After 1945, a crisis of faith swept across Europe. Churches could not reconcile divine goodness with industrial genocide. At the same time, colonial empires collapsed, exposing Christianity's complicity in conquest. Missionaries had often marched beside soldiers. Faith had justified empire. As nations rebuilt, the welfare state took over religion's social mission, feeding the poor, teaching the young, healing the sick. Compassion was now organized by law, not liturgy. The Catholic Church attempted renewal through the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965, opening Mass to local languages, engaging with science, and reaching out to other faiths. But its reforms divided believers. Traditionalists saw Vatican II as surrender, while progressives thought it didn't go far enough. Instead of revival, the Church deepened its own divisions. By the 1970s, the results were stark. In Britain, weekly attendance fell below 10%. In France, under 5%. Even as Europe prospered materially, its moral compass fractured. People no longer looked upward for meaning. They looked inward. Europe had survived its wars, but its belief had not. What about you? Do you think Europe lost faith because of war or because of comfort? Drop your take in the comments. I'm curious where you stand. The Europe that rose from the rubble of war was richer, freer, and more peaceful than any generation before it. But with that comfort came amnesia. When modernity offered security on earth, heaven lost its urgency. Public education became entirely secular. Science and civics replaced scripture. Welfare and healthcare gave the poor stability, once found only in faith. Religion, which once provided community and hope, was being quietly replaced by institutions that required no miracles, just taxes. The numbers told the story. In Sweden, less than 20% of 15-year-olds go through confirmation today, compared to 80% in the 1970s. In Italy, 80% identify as Catholic, yet 31% never attend services. Even Poland, long seen as Europe's bastion of belief, reports that while 84% identify as Catholic, barely half consider themselves practicing. The exodus is most visible in Germany, where over 500,000 people officially left the Catholic Church in 2022, rising to 700,000 when accounting for deaths. Many cite the Kirchensteuer, a mandatory church tax, but others simply see no reason to belong. Across the Netherlands, more than 1,000 churches have closed since 2000. Many transformed into cafes, libraries, or apartments. Prosperity dulled the need for prayer. Why plead for daily bread when the supermarket never closed? Why confess sins when morality had become a matter of personal choice? And yet, comfort created its own quiet despair. Without religion's shared framework, people turned inward for meaning, seeking spirituality in self-expression, consumer identity, or fleeting pleasure. The continent that once defined salvation in sacred terms now sought it in comfort, achievement, and autonomy. Faith hadn't been defeated. It had simply been replaced by convenience. If the industrial age weakened faith, the digital age dismantled it. In modern Europe, Religion wasn't banned or fought against. It was simply outcompeted. Screens replaced sermons, and endless scrolling became the new ritual of reflection. According to the Pew Research Center, 2022, only 18% of Europeans under 30 attend any kind of religious service monthly. In the Netherlands and Czech Republic, that number drops below 10%. Entire generations now grow up not as believers who drift away, but as non-believers by default. The internet didn't just replace the pulpit, it replaced the parish. People once gathered around altars. Now they gather around algorithms. The sense of belonging that religion provided is now recreated in online communities, political movements, and fandoms. Faith once united across nations. Digital tribes divide within them. The COVID-19 pandemic only accelerated this drift. When churches closed their doors and streamed services online, attendance never fully returned. Surveys in 2022 revealed that around 40% of regular churchgoers in Western Europe did not come back even after restrictions lifted. The digital convenience that kept people connected had also made worship optional, and eventually unnecessary. Yet the hunger for transcendence never disappeared. It simply changed form. Astrology apps, mindfulness platforms, yoga studios, and wellness influencers filled the spiritual void. Each offered the same ancient promise: peace, purpose, and guidance, but in an individualized, on-demand format. Sociologist Grace Davy called this Europe's defining shift. Believing without belonging. People haven't stopped believing in something greater. They've just stopped believing together. Across the continent, faith has become personal, portable, and privatized. The church is no longer a building. It's an inner playlist. When people left the pews, they didn't abandon belief. They reinvented it. Today's Europe is a mosaic of new creeds, environmental, technological, and humanist. Each offers a moral code, a sense of community, and even rituals, all without invoking God. Environmentalism became one of the continent's most powerful spiritual forces. Climate marches resemble pilgrimages. Their chants sound like hymns. The moral language of sin and redemption persists. Only now, carbon is the sin, and sustainability is salvation. Countries like Germany and Sweden treat ecological responsibility almost as civic religion, teaching it from childhood. Then came the faith in technology, a belief that progress itself can redeem humanity. Artificial intelligence, data, and algorithms play roles once reserved for divine omniscience. Tech culture promises transcendence through innovation, immortality through code, perfection through design. Even confession has gone digital. We tell our secrets to search engines instead of priests. Meanwhile, humanism has become Europe's moral backbone. Nations like Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands, among the most secular on earth, consistently rank among the world's happiest and most generous societies. Empathy, equality, and personal freedom have replaced divine command as guiding virtues. Yet even in this secular world, echoes of Christianity remain. Weddings, funerals, and holidays like Christmas and Easter continue, not as acts of faith, but as threads of shared memory. In France, where only 25% still identify as Catholic and over 50% call themselves non-religious, church bells still mark time over villages that no longer pray. Europe hasn't lost faith, it has fragmented it. Billions of tiny personal religions now coexist in place of one collective belief. The cross may no longer unite Europe, but its silhouette still shadows every new ideal that rises to replace it. While Europe drifted towards secularism, the rest of the world turned in the opposite direction. Christianity didn't die, it moved. In 1900, nearly 70% of the world's Christians lived in Europe. By 2020, that number had fallen to 22%. The faith's heart has migrated southward to Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia. Nowhere is that transformation more dramatic than in Africa. The continent had just 9 million Christians in 1900. Today, it has over 700 million. By 2050, it is projected to reach 1.3 billion. Meanwhile, Europe's Christian population is shrinking and aging fast. the median age of a Christian in Europe is 44, compared to 19 in Africa. The dynamic has reversed completely. The lands that once sent missionaries are now being re-evangelized by them. In London, Paris, and Berlin, thriving Nigerian, Congolese, and Filipino congregations are filling empty churches. Some of Europe's few growing parishes are run by immigrant pastors preaching to multicultural crowds. It's a historic irony. The religion that once justified Europe's empires now flourishes among the very peoples those empires once subdued. Christianity hasn't vanished. It has simply changed its accent. By 2060, not a single European nation is expected to rank among the world's 10 largest Christian populations. The faith that shaped Europe's art, ethics, and architecture will endure, but mostly beyond its borders. Europe no longer exports belief. It observes it from afar, and in that quiet shift, a deeper question emerges. If the faith that once bound Europe together has moved on, what will take its place? Europe's story isn't just about disbelief, it's about disconnection. Removing God from public life didn't erase the need for meaning. It only forced people to seek it elsewhere. Philosopher Charles Taylor calls this the immanent frame, a worldview confined to the material, where transcendence is optional, not assumed. But when meaning must be self-made, it often collapses under its own weight. Despite being the most educated, peaceful, and prosperous generation in history, modern Europeans report unprecedented emptiness. The EU Mental Health Report, 2023, found that nearly 1 in 4 adults struggles with chronic anxiety or depression. The World Health Organization lists Europe as having the highest antidepressant use per capita in the world. Loneliness, especially among the young, has reached epidemic levels in cities once filled with community parishes. Without shared rituals or moral frameworks, people turn to substitutes, career success, identity politics, consumer choices, to fill the void once occupied by faith. Art, activism, and self-expression become new sacraments, but they rarely provide the enduring connection or forgiveness that religion once offered. Europe hasn't stopped asking spiritual questions. It has just stopped expecting answers from heaven. The result is a continent rich in comfort, but poor in conviction. A civilization that mastered survival, yet still hungers for significance. As cathedrals echo empty and digital feeds overflow, one truth becomes clear. Humans never stop worshiping. They only change what they worship. Europe didn't abolish God, it archived him. Faith no longer rules the continent, yet its echoes shape everything, from its art and architecture to its ethics and laws. Even the most secular European values, human rights, equality, compassion, grew from the same soil, once watered by Scripture. Across the continent, people still gather for Christmas dinners, baptize their children out of tradition, and walk through cathedrals with reverence they can't quite explain. The bells still ring, though few know the hymns. Perhaps Europe hasn't forgotten God. It's simply learned to live without speaking his name. The divine has retreated from the heavens into human hearts, into memory, into art. The question isn't whether Christianity will survive. It already has. The question is what Europe will believe in next. You've been watching Geologic, where history, science, and belief intersect. If this journey gave you something to reflect on, tap like. Share it with someone curious about our changing world, and subscribe for more stories that dig beneath the surface of civilization. Because sometimes, to understand where we're going, we must first ask, what happened to the gods we left behind?